What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's Pastor Keenan with his sidekick, Nick. Nick, what's happening, man?
Oh, it's too hot outside, but, you know...
I always look for the Dynamite drop-ins, and he's like, "Oh, it's kind of hot, too hot. It's hot. You know, like, all right, man, I got you, bro. So it is hot, man.
Mm-hmm.
Where people were frying eggs out on the sidewalk, people cooking bacon on their hoods. What else? What else could be a good one?
I don't even want to. I mean, honestly, like it's so hot outside right now. Like the temperatures are rising, inflation is rising.
I literally saw the devil at Walmart.
Yeah,
he was checking out at Walmart.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, just throwing that out there, man.
He was. I mean, most people call that a Karen, but I guess you could call him a devil too.
This is true. But thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Everyday Christian, where we try to help the everyday Christian out with their struggles. We break down the sermons from the week before and just put it into everyday context, man, where you can grow a little bit. And again, we just thank you for supporting. You can always go to Spotify, to Apple Music, or the
Apple Podcast.
Apple Podcast, man.
You can't tell it. We're really well together tonight. We're
exactly.
Definitely having the best day ever.
Absolutely, man. So everything's going great. It's fantastic. Rainbows, buttercups, and Mountain Dews.
No, we can't say rainbows. It's not June anymore.
Well, this is true. I agree with that as well. So it is July. It's hot, and we just got done with fireworks, man. I feel like we're doing great with that, Nick. It
was
that's
popping.
Wonderful. It was good, man. So thankful for everybody that showed up for that. Hope you celebrated Independence Day with your family, with your friends, and you had a good time. But let's talk about the sermon, Nick. Let's talk about from Judges chapter 2. We talked Sunday about the title Distortion and what distortion means. Whenever the word distortion comes to you, what do you think right off the bat?
I always get that like weird, that 70s feeling where you the weird
swirly.
colors. It's swirly. It's like
Absolutely.
kind of getting drawn out and distorted.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what I always think of when I hear that word.
That's in the physical. What about in the spiritual? What do you think distorted is?
Cloudy with a chance of meatball. No, I just definitely, I think, everything when, if you think of spiritually distorted, I think of, a lot of people getting doctrine mixed up, switched around.
Yep.
People maybe, making things not as clear as they should be. People kind of muddling the truth. I think of like muddy water gospel.
Yes, sir.
Muddy water doctrine, that kind of stuff.
Murky.
Murky.
Yes.
Very murky. Something that just doesn't look as clear as it should, which really comes from the definition of distorted, really.
Absolutely, man. Judges 2:10. I said Sunday, I feel like this verse is ranked probably in the top 3 scariest verses in the Bible, because whenever you hear it, you're going to be like, ooh, that's kind of tragic. But it says in Judges 2:10, one verse, eventually that entire generation died and was buried. And then another generation grew up that didn't know anything of God or the work he had done for Israel. Now, how scary is that? Another generation grew up that didn't know anything of God or the work he had done for Israel. So let's put a backdrop on this, Nick, and then we'll talk about it. Joshua's passed away, 110 years old. Nobody's there to take the reins of leadership, okay? So instead of the tribes of Israel fighting together, now they are trying to inhabit the land that God had given them. Joshua had divvied out some land to each tribe, and as the tribes of Israel went on their way to try to inhabit their land, they split up, okay, into their sectionals or into their tribes or whatever you want to call them. And they go into their land and they try to fight. They try to push out the enemy. And whenever they do that, Nick, they find that the battle is so much harder doing it on their own versus together. We have talked about in previous episodes, they were 31-0. They were on some winning streaks. They were feeling good. God had given them everything that they had put their hands to. Like, it was amazing what they could do as a nation. Now they're tribes. Now they're separated. Now they're sectioned off now. They're not supporting each other. And so they walk into these battles, they walk into these battlefields, into these sections of land that was given to them, and as they try to drive out the enemy, they have no help or support. It's just them against the enemy. And the problem with that is, Nick, is that whenever you don't have the help, the support, the people guarding your back, the people fighting for you whenever you're tired, that whole situation, the enemy becomes even harder to drive out. So what happens is that instead of driving the enemy out, then the Israelites begin to live with the enemy. They began to live in the situations, in the country, and God had spoke to them and said, if you do not drive these people out, then you will live with them and their gods will become a trap to you. Basically saying, you're going to take your focus off me and you'll be focused on everything they're doing, everything they worship, everything they are, every sin. You're going to be in the middle of it. Like God was basically saying, you're going to turn your back on me if you don't drive out the enemy. And that's what happened. Every tribe, you can go back and read over in Judges chapter 1 and the very first part of chapter 2. You can go back and read and see how every battle turned the same way, Nick. Every battle. It was I didn't defeat them, I couldn't push them out, so I'm just going to live with them. And whenever you live with something, Nick, like sin, instead of driving it out, whether it be in your relationship, your finances, your mindset, whatever it is, and whenever you live and you tolerate that sin, you become entrapped to it. You become snared into it almost. And whenever you do that, you start to struggle to a point of where you look and you go, man, I used to be winning. I used to be doing some stuff really good. But now because I didn't address what I needed to address, now I'm in this mess. Nick, let's talk about distortion, man, and how let's talk first off about how splitting into these different tribes. I mean, there were different tribes to begin with, but splitting off on their own to try to inherit this land instead of fighting and taking it together and pushing out the enemy. Let's start there. How important is it that we operate functionally as a unit, as a group, as a body, as a church, and not just individual Christians?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's we've talked about this over the last several weeks about how the importance of having conversations, building bridges, connecting, and working together. How important it is, not only in our spiritual walk, but just as humanity. Yes. Like I think it's just something that we've gotten so backwards. We all want that it's my way or the highway. That it's this way or that way. That black or white mentality. We think everything has to be this way or that way. And it's just we get so lost in that, and especially spiritually. We sit here and we try to fight battles on our own when it says in the Bible where one or two or more gathered, there I am in the midst of you, right. But we're sitting here trying to lone wolf this stuff and pray ourselves out of holes and pray ourselves into healing and pray ourselves into the future. But that's not how we're called to be as Christians. We were called to come together, to pray together, to fellowship together, to worship together. It was never on there where it said, like you're supposed to do this all by yourself. Like it never says that, and there were times that Jesus even went off on his own, but like he came back and he took his disciples with him still, they were still there. But I mean, we're supposed to be doing things, with other people together. We're supposed to be, as a Christian, we're supposed to be operating as a unit, again, and where they got backwards here in Judges, they were always losing all these battles because they were trying to fight them by themselves. Right. They didn't have the support. They didn't have God even on their side doing these things. He told them, don't do this. Right, but they still sat there and kept doing it. And how many times are we sitting there trying to keep doing something by ourselves when God's like, stop.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes God will give us what we asked for. Just as we see here, they're losing over and over again. And just like what God said, He gave it to them. They were stuck there with their oppressors, and they would fall back into, the same sin over and over and over again.
Right.
Which is just, how we are. And I think, one of the craziest things I get from all this is just imagining how powerful we would be if we were unified.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's, look at how powerful, the Israelites were when they were unified. 31-0, they were dominating the world.
Yeah.
They were a force to be reckoned with. People were terrified of them. People were honestly that they had the fear of God that they were putting into people's hearts. But then they split off, and it was the exact. And I think that's what we need to think about as Christians today. Yeah. As the everyday Christian is, should we be fighting these battles alone?
Right.
No.
Right.
Should we be fighting these battles, on our hands and knees with our friends, with our family members? Everybody praying together, towards the same thing, fighting for the same outcomes. Yes, that's what we need more of. But unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. I think what you said last Sunday, and I think I shared this news article with you that, only there's 17% of the world now are unbelievers, or just in this country.
Right.
And there's the math is a little wonky, but I think it was about 84% of people is an all-time high that don't believe in the gospel anymore. It's crazy, the percentages that we keep seeing, it's just an all-time low. low, an all-time high amount of people that don't believe in the gospel anymore, and an all-time low of people that do.
Right.
And I think, just the results of this, the pandemic, results of, like political issues, inflation, whatever it may be, we're seeing, and I really believe that the state of the world today is a direct result of the disunity of the church.
Oh, absolutely.
We see disunity in the church, and church matters. That's what's so crazy.
Right.
We are fighting with each other back and forth on what really matters in the church and how we should be portraying things, but it's crazy. We're distorting so much stuff, and it's just leaving people with a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to Christianity.
This is true, man, and I think it leaves Christians losing battles that they're supposed to be winning in the process. And so they see this going on, man, and it's like every tribe that went into their respective areas to try to take over that land, they could not push the enemy out. And so they began to allow the enemy to stay there. And so their practices and everything else that they would do, their gods that they would worship, their sin that they lived in, well, you know what? It began to encamp in the areas that they were at. And Nick, I can tell you right now, man, there's only so much sin you can be around before you just start doing it yourself. And especially if you lone wolf it, like what we talked about, if you're out there on your own and you start hanging around sin and you're in the middle of sin and you live in it like they lived in it, you know what I'm saying? So like whenever you do that and you're not trying to pray, you're not trying to focus, you're not trying to read, your vision, your faith, everything will become distorted. It's like whenever you start moving away from the values, the practices, the beliefs, the principles, whatever you want to call it, man, that was instilled in you. And they should know this. They should know that it should be instilled in them because they've seen God do the miraculous. They've seen God go 31-0. They've seen God hand them land and everything else. But that just goes to show you how whenever you split off and you try to do your own thing and you go your own direction and you try to, accomplish this purpose, that just goes to show you how powerful God is because, even without God, you may have a few victories in life, but with God, serving God's purpose, seeing what God has in store for you, you can drive out the enemy, you can win battles, you can literally be prosperous in your life because of your values, your views, and everything not being distorted, not being distorted. And it's a process, Nick. It's a process, so how God spoke it to me was that we cannot blame the generation of today for the shape that everything is in whenever we stopped prioritizing God in our generation. Mm-hmm. Like we can't begin to blame this generation and go, oh, the kids of today, oh, the society of today, everything. Like it's been a gradual process. You can go back and look over the history of time of how we've began to basically just gravitate away from God. And it starts in the church. Mm-hmm. It doesn't start in schools. It doesn't start in government buildings. It doesn't start in places where like people want to go directly to and they go, oh, we're taking God out of schools. We're taking God out of the government buildings. We're taking God out of, whatever. It started, and I mean, this may be harsh to say, but it started whenever churches started taking God out of their sermons, started taking God out of their services even, mm-hmm. Let's nitpick and let's critique, let's go to the boards and let's run statistics and let's make numbers and, what hits people the most? Well, we found that if we do a 37-minute sermon, we start at this time and we only play 2 songs at the beginning, only a half song at the end, and then we rush everybody out and then we can get more people in and, and it's like the church might be running record numbers, but yet they're not giving people power. Mm-hmm. They're not giving people presence. They're not giving people promises. They're not giving people the stance that they need to fight the enemy with. And because of that, now it's almost like we're going to rock concerts, we're going to plays, we're going to theater, we're going to public speaking events, we're going to motivational seminars instead of being close to God. Nick, I'm preaching. Help me out just a little bit so I can take a breath.
Right. But yeah, we've basically, and I hate, because I guess I would say I'm from the current modern generation, being 24.
I guess I kind of am.
You're close. But anyway, so we're talking, like I said, the people in the generation before me, they are the ones who started to, and we're going to use the name drop here, they started to distort the gospel with the world.
Right.
We started taking the world and distorting the gospel with it. We started making it to where we're not offending people, or we made it to where we're more accepting of this, that, or the other, so that way we can, again, it's become a numbers game. Like, we're more about attendance than we are, putting people into heaven.
Right.
Like I said, we talk about churches all the time, like these mega churches who have 37-minute services because they have 5 services that day. Yeah. And, God forbid God tries to move in the second service, it's going to screw everything up.
Right. Yeah.
If we're sitting here and like we're in the middle of that last worship song and people are getting healed, saved, and set free, but you have another service starting here in 2 minutes, you're going to be pushing people out the door and saying, "Nope, screw this act of God."
Yeah.
We're distorting, the gospel. We're distorting acts of God by trying to fit the world into church when we should be trying to fit the church into the world and put, and it's just crazy to me that we've been able to do that. I think I shared that news article with you the other day. How we have this church, my Catholic church, who was offering a service the other day. They did they did an apology service to the LGBTQIA plus community. Yeah. Like, we're sorry that the church has hurt you.
Right.
But to that extent, and again, there's that line between loving and helping people and being there for them and, not treating them differently.
Right.
But also sin is sin.
Right.
And we don't need to be saying, okay, as a church, we're going to be more accepting of sin. That's not how the church is supposed to be.
Right.
We're not, we're sorry that we hurt your feelings for sinning. Like, we're sorry we hurt your feelings for murdering people, or we're sorry we hurt your feelings for raping people. Like, that's the same thing, and we're sitting there doing this and we're distorting the gospel. We're distorting God's message by, by allowing the world in to change us.
Right. And I like that you said that you began to list the other sins, because that's the thing about it. And here's another thing. Churches will pick sins and harp on them for days, for weeks, for months, for years, and it's like, we want to address the sins, and I mean, I'll just be completely honest, man, and we'll still try to keep this under 30 minutes, but we only have one verse, so we can talk a little bit more. But it's like to me, people go after the easy sins. Let's go after homosexuality. You've been preaching, people's been preaching on that for years, on top of years, on top of years. So I get what the Catholic Church is doing. We're offering an apology. You feel like you've been picked on. I get that. I understand that whole situation. It's like you said, there's a fine line you have to walk there. Where it's like, I want you to come in and hear the gospel. You need to hear the gospel. Everybody needs to hear the gospel, but not just the homosexual. The person who committed adultery. The reason why probably 9 out of 10 pastors don't talk about adultery is because they suffer from lusting probably most of the time. You won't hear people talk about that. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, but you won't ever hear, a lot of people talk about fasting because most pastors are overweight. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, that's where I get to, man, where it's like we're distorting the gospel to go after one sin because why? Because it's more prevalent, because it's more talked about, because it's more advertised, whatever the case may be. And it's like, we have to get to a point, Nick, where we're focused on, I was telling people about the fireworks. To see people outside of church, to fellowship with your church family outside of church, that reminds you that people are normal. That reminds you that people have struggles. That reminds you that people have flesh. That reminds you, like if you want to really grow with your church family, fellowship with them outside of church. You know what I'm saying? To understand, like, we talked for an hour and a half before this podcast, just to vent, just to have a conversation, just to know, you're Nick Sullivan. You struggle. I'm Keenan Riley. I struggle. We struggle together. You know what I'm saying? We are the everyday struggling Christians, right? That's what we do. But nonetheless, it's like, if we allow ourselves, Nick, to get away from the gospel, to get away from the whole gospel. You see what I'm saying? Not just to get away from, this cherry picking. This makes me feel good, so I'll preach on this, but I'll leave this alone. But we're not going to talk about this, but and everything else. And it's like, whenever you begin to pick and choose the battles, pick and choose the sins, you're no different from the Israelites. You see what I'm saying? Whenever you go, I'm going to harp on homosexuality, and I'm running 50 miles an hour right head first into it, but I'm the only one. Well, guess what's going to happen? You're going to, pardon my language, but you're going to piss off a bunch of people because you're going about it the wrong way to begin with. And like we talked about on Sunday, if people are not ready to hear your language, if people are not ready to hear the gospel, don't shove your truth down somebody's throat because you're going to make them sick. You see what I'm saying? People do need to be loved. People do need to be prayed for. People do need to have grace in their life, but you also have to figure out a way, watch this, to convey the gospel gospel said, or Jesus said, in truth and in love. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't have a problem telling the truth to people because we feel like, oh yeah, I'll just tell you about your sin. The problem is we have a huge problem in telling them out of love. You see what I'm saying? We tell them out of judgment. We don't tell them out of love. You see, we don't have a conversation. We just tell them. We throw a rock at them and then walk off. That's judgment. To have a conversation, that's out of love, and that doesn't distort the gospel because that's what Jesus done. Jesus had a lot of conversations out of love to show people that they could be better than what they were. Now, that makes a huge difference. And whenever we get together and we actually don't distort the gospel, we preach the gospel in its entirety from Genesis to Revelation, not leaving anything out. I think, honestly, then people see, Nick, that the gospel was written in truth, but it was also written in love, right?
Yeah, and I think that's we kind of get that so sideways. I think sometimes when Jesus came, there was a new covenant, and we get so thrown back into the old vengeful, wrathful God of the Old Testament. That we sit there and we have those sermons where it's like, you're going to hell if you do this, you're going to hell if you do that, and that's what the world knows us by. Yeah, and I think that is honestly one of the biggest barriers for us to try and get across. And I think that's something I tell people all the time. I said, you don't, as a Christian, you don't have to walk up to somebody who's homosexual. You don't have to walk up to somebody who has gotten an abortion. You don't have to walk up to somebody who's a murderer and tell them what you're doing is wrong. Right. They know that. Right. They know what your opinion is on that. As a Christian, if you walk up and you're wearing a cross on your shirt and they're wearing a rainbow flag, they know they have an expectation as to what's going to come out of your mouth. True. Because of what those radical loud voices have said for so many years. Right. I mean, just look at the recent abortion debacle. The arguments back and forth on Facebook. Yeah. I mean, just everybody knows. Again, are we furthering the gospel or are we pushing people further away from it? Right. I think that's a question that we need to ask ourselves. Are we being empathetic or are we pushing, like you said, are we forcing our opinion down somebody's throat? Yeah. Are we approaching these situations with love, with empathy, with understanding, or are we saying you're wrong for what you believe? Right. Because again, these people already know what they already know that we think they're wrong. Yeah. In a roundabout way, they know that we're going to tell them, hey, what you're doing is wrong. I don't agree with it. I wouldn't do it myself. They already know that. But again, we're distorting the gospel even in a different way by saying, we're pushing these people away by only telling them that truth. We're not showing them love. We're not showing them, mercy. We're not showing them grace that God has given us after we sin every single time. We're sitting there, walking up to these people and being like, you're going to hell for believing this. Right. You're an awful person for believing this. Right. And, it's just crazy. The comments that you see on Facebook, through the last couple of months over whatever issue you want to throw out there. Yeah. It's just, there's Christians out there who are pushing people away from the gospel. Yeah. And, there is a difference between, the gospel is going to cause offense to somebody, but, again, you're not supposed to make somebody hate Jesus because of, how you're acting. Right. God wants you to show people love, show them, again, it's not our job to change people. Absolutely. It's our job to introduce them to who God is, to introduce them to Jesus, and then allow them to work, in their own lives. Absolutely. But again, we get that so backwards, and because again, that's us just distorting the way things are supposed to go. Yeah. We're pushing people further away instead of bringing them closer to God, closer to Jesus, closer to salvation. We're pushing them away from all of it because we're just showing anger. We're showing, just all these emotions. We're being emotional. We're being impulsive. We're being reactive instead of showing love and grace and mercy to everybody, just as God showed us. If you really just read by the Bible standards, if you lied today, you're just as bad as that person who, wants to abort their child. True. Or if you lied today, you're just as bad as somebody who raped somebody. It's crazy to think that we get so stuck up in that, you're worse than me because of this, or, I'm better than you because of that. Right. Because that's distorting the gospel. It's 100% all it is. And, we're teaching that to our kids. We're developing and creating a generation of hateful people, hateful Christians. Yes. Because of the way that we're acting on Facebook, our kids are watching us and watching our reactions to things. When your kid sees you in public and you're sitting there throwing rocks at this person with a rainbow flag, or you're throwing rocks at that pro-choice sign, if your kids are seeing you act hateful and judgmental and mean towards that person, person. That's the generation we're raising up. And that's why we have the current generation of Christians that we have, is because we saw people doing that over and over and over again. And that's why we have a generation of lost people that we have today.
True statement.
Is because, they know what these old Christian men and old Christian women did to the people who were quote unquote sinners, even though we're all sinners and we all fall short.
Right.
So, I mean, that's what we're kind of going to get to, just how we're raising up this generation that's completely distorted.
Right. And that's what leads me into my last point, man. Let's softly close this thing out right here where, basically they lived in this situation for so long that as the generation died out and a new generation came about, that they were so lost in sin, so lost in distortion, so lost in just everyday living, that the next generation that came about knew nothing about what God had done. They knew nothing about the Red Sea. They knew nothing about the Jordan. They knew nothing about being set free from Egypt. They knew nothing about providing manna in the desert. They knew nothing about the works that God had done. And honestly, Nick, I don't think we can expect people to appreciate God. And I talked about this on Sunday. The Bible says you will be known by the blood of the Lamb and the word of your testimony. And if you are not willing to talk about how good God has been, and man, I'm telling you, I said this on Sunday, and I will stand by this until the day that I die. It is not bragging to tell people how blessed you have been through God. It is not bragging. It is a testimony to how good God has been to you, not how good you've been to God. Mm-hmm. It's not based on our works. It's not based on, how, I gave 1,000, so God's been good to me this week, or I sung 4 songs, God's been good to me. I prayed 3 times, God's been good. It's not about your performance. It's God's promise to you. As long as you try your best, to follow Him, do what He tells you to do, He's not going to leave you nor forsake you. He's going to be there. He's going to provide. He's going to protect. He's going to do all of those things. Is it tough to trust? Yes. Is it tough to be patient? Yes. Is it tough? Absolutely. Absolutely. But if we stay focused, it's a whole different outcome versus being distorted. Because if we stay focused, then our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, we're products, Nick, yourself, myself, Fruition Church, all of these people are products of people who've stayed focused over generations. We're here today because people have stayed focused. And if we stay focused, my kids, your kids, the church, people, we will persevere because of people staying focused and not being distorted. So, Nick, take us out right here. Talk about how important it is to tell your testimony, to be powerful with it, and to let people know about how good God has been to you.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, if we don't tell God or tell people the things God has done for us, why are they going to want to be saved?
Absolutely.
And I think that's, we just sit there and we're like, God's good. If you read the Bible and, you read it and it says God's good, it says Jesus is good. We're sitting there like repeating all these, different verses and stuff to them. But, we forget to tell that person like, hey, I see that you're struggling with anxiety and depression. I used to struggle with that heavy. I used to struggle with that like crazy. I was anxious all the time. I was sad all the time. I thought about ending my life too. But let me tell you about how I came out of it.
Yes,
this is what God has done for me. This is where He's brought me out of. I used to be that person who, just a, quick testimony myself. I used to be that person who was afraid to stand up in front of 2 people and talk to them.
Right.
And now I'm at a job where I'm talking to 500 kids a week. I'm sitting here doing a podcast. I'm praying for people at service on Sunday. That is stuff that I never thought I would be able to do, but through God I have been able to accomplish.
Right.
And like these are things that you can accomplish too. I know so many people dealing with anxiety and social anxiety and depression. They're never, they don't feel like they are worth anything, and I love being able to pray for those people because I can tell them that I used to be where you're at,
right,
but God has brought me out of that. But if we're not willing to do that to the lost in the world, then they're not going to want to, be saved. They're not going to want to know who Jesus is because then what's the point?
Right.
If you're struggling with the same things that I'm struggling with, if you're constantly complaining 24/7 and you never think anything's going to get any better and you think things are horrible all the time and you're always sad and upset and anxious and fearful all the time, why do I want to put aside the world and get what you have?
Right.
Like, nobody's going to want to do that. And again, that's where we get backwards, and teaching our kids like, don't tell anybody about what all you got. But yeah, there's a difference between bragging and, talking about your testimony.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like if you're like, I never thought I'd come out of this. I never thought I'd be able to do this, that, or the other. But there's a difference between saying God brought me out of that and then saying, I've got a nice brand new car and new t-shirts and new houses and new this, that, and the other. There's a difference between shoving everything you got down someone's throat and being like, God blessed me with this.
Right.
Over time I had nothing. I never thought I would have this. In the worst day possible, when I thought I would never graduate college, God brought me through it in the last second. He was able to provide everything I needed to get that last passing grade. There's, just telling people about God's grace, God's mercies, and what he can do for you and what he's done for you already is just super important. And making sure that our kids know that, that when your kids be like, why do we have these nice things? You don't just be like, because I worked hard for them.
Right.
That's not the right mentality to have. We'd be like, I don't deserve any of this.
Right.
I'm a sinner. I've messed up. I deserve nothing but, being dead in a ditch somewhere. But God has been graceful. He's been merciful. He's blessed me beyond anything that I could possibly have right now that I deserve. I don't deserve my marriage. I don't deserve my car. I don't deserve my apartment. I don't deserve my job or my college degree. I don't deserve any of that, and I wouldn't have a single bit of it if it weren't for God.
Right.
And being able to use that as a testimony to other people and to give them hope that, let them know that with Christ there is hope. There is hope to get past what you're dealing with right now.
Absolutely, man. And I like how you take it out like that. So, to put this whole thing in a nutshell, don't distort the gospel, man. Preach the gospel from Genesis to Revelation. Be mindful of the people around you, and also be able to confront what's wrong in your life. Be able to confront the people that's wrong in your life, so that way you don't get entrenched in a bunch of sin and lose focus and get so distorted on the Bible, so distorted on God, even so distorted on the church, that you just throw in the towel and you're done. So, keep focused, and keep pushing forward. And again, we thank you so much for tuning in and for downloading the podcast, for supporting so much. You can go check us out on Facebook at Fruition Church. You can also check us out on our website at www.fruitionchurchky.org. And if you're ever in the area, you can always stop by and see us on a Sunday morning at 11:15 a.m. 200 South Lincoln Boulevard, Hodgenville, Kentucky. This is Pastor Keenan along with my sidekick Nick saying thank you very much. Be blessed and have a wonderful week.